What's going on, everyone? Casey Kasem here, bringing you a brand new episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem. It's a podcast going behind the scenes of the fantasy football industry through interviews with fantasy football analysts, writers, podcasters, YouTubers, content creators, and much more. On this episode, I chatted with Alex Caruso of the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. We talked about his IDP league with his dad, being prepared, having just under 23,000 followers on TikTok. It's now at 23.3K, and we just recorded this on the 26th. Tom Brady, and much more. You can find Alex on Twitter at Alex Caruso, TikTok at fresh_fantasy, and Instagram at fresh.fantasy. And again, make sure to check out his podcast, the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at @TheCaseyKasem. You can follow the pod on Twitter at GetReal_pod. You can find my writing with the Fantasy Footballers at thefantasyfootballers.com. I am now the social media manager for the Dynasty Trade Calculator as well. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. You can also help grow the show by joining the Patreon, patreon.com/CaseyKasem. You only need to donate a few bucks a month. Come be a part of the Stay Rad crew. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to help grow the show even more, make sure to rate and review the podcast. Thanks to all of you for being so rad. Thank you so much to Trophy Smack for being an affiliate of the Get Real with Casey Kasem podcast. This is the spot to check out if you're looking for fantasy football trophies, belts, rings, draft boards, and more. I have an affiliate link below that you can check out to view all of their rad items. Free shipping, free engraving, and 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Make sure to use the discount code GetRealPod for a free ring with the purchase of a trophy or belt. Note, you must have both the trophy or belt plus ring in your cart for the discount to apply. And now what you've been waiting for, my chat with Alex Caruso. Awesome. Cool. See, that's how it's done. That's how it's done. Alex, it's so great to be able to talk to you tonight. I got to meet you at the Fantasy Football Expo, so that was pretty rad. How'd you like that experience?
It was one of the best experiences of my life, honestly. Like, I had so much fun. It was an unbelievable weekend on the way there, on the way back, everything in between. Like, it was absolutely awesome. It was my first expo as well.
That's totally awesome. And I know that, like, it being your first expo, you had a ton of people that you could meet and learn from. And like, the experience must have been just something out of this world. What was your favorite part of the expo?
Oh man, I think it had to be on Sunday getting to meet people, because like, I think it was so big for me, and especially everything I'm trying to do, because like, I'm someone, like, I do podcasts and stuff. So it's weird for people to hear me say that I'm a little bit shy at first and I can be a little bit awkward, and like, going in, like, to be honest, I was terrified. And then I saw someone that I knew, and they were like, I wasn't like struggling. They were just like, hey, like, this is your chance to go and talk to people. And then the script just flipped. And whatever was a part of me, I felt like I was in podcast mode almost. It's like where I just stopped caring about what people think, and I'm just being me. And then it was just every single person that I wanted to talk to, let's find a way to go talk to them. And I was able to do that. And I think I checked off every big person, or any person that I saw that I wanted to talk to. I think I got to talk to, except for the Trophy Smack guy. I just never had a chance, but everything else that I had a chance, at least, I got to talk to. And I think that's one of the coolest things that, like, we talked about before, when I got to see you at the expo. Is like, this is so cool, because like, again, we're on a podcast here and I can see your face, but like, people have legs in real life. People have heights, and it's just cool to make those in-person connections and to meet people that you've never met before. And you're like you can see someone like Mike Clay or Michael Fabiano, and like, they're real people, and they exist, and you can see them in real life. They're just not on your TV screen and stuff like that. I think that was so cool, because the other thing that was like my favorite part about it, and why I really love this industry, is that like, no one big times anybody. Like, it could be Scott Fish or Mike Clay, and they'll treat you as like the same way as a lonely peasant like me that's just like trying to make it. And they treat you the exact same way, no matter who you are, what you feel like. Everyone, you just feel equal, and everyone makes you feel equal. And I think that's one of the really coolest parts about this industry, because I know a lot of other places aren't like that, with the people that are biggest aren't the willing to treat the smaller people like myself the same way. And I think that's really cool.
And you say smaller people like yourself, but he's talking about he's not talking about his height. Mm-hmm. Is that your height? When we went to the Fantasy Expo, I'm sure the question, or the first thing people said to you, I know it was one of the first things I said to you, was, wow, you are tall. His height is like, sorry, I mean, it's you don't get that. Like you said, you don't get it behind the screen. You see it in real life, and you're like towering over everybody.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing that I heard over and over, because people that don't know, I'm 6'4", maybe 6'5". I'm not slouching too much. And again, I was probably one of the tallest, if not the tallest person at the expo. So like, all these people that are coming to that are not as tall, boys and girls, whoever was, they're like, oh wow, you are so tall in real life. And like, I'm used to it because I hear it all the time. And like, whenever I meet people, it's like, "Oh, you're so tall," and I'm like, "Yes, like I am." But it's one of those things that you hear a lot. But it is interesting, like you said, the height thing. Even for myself, like I'm tall in real life, but to see some of these people that are like, "Oh, wow, you're super tall," or other people that aren't, it's weird to see. Again, like I said, people with legs, and everyone's a
Yes.
different height and stuff like that. But on camera, everyone's like the same height, and you're the same,
Hmm.
and you really can't tell. So it's cool to see those type of things at an event like an expo. So pretty awesome.
So let's take it back to the beginning because fantasy
Mhm.
football is why we're all where we are.
Mhm.
But when you were growing up, were you a fan of sports? Did you play sports? What was that like?
Yeah, so I grew up playing sports all my life. Like I think from the moment I was born, I guess I wasn't super into it when I was super young, but by the time I hit 5 years old, I was playing, I mean, soccer, basketball, baseball, like anything you can imagine, like I was playing it. So I grew up always playing sports and loving sports and stuff like that. And then I grew up watching sports as well. And yeah, it's been awesome. Like you said, I grew up playing everything you can imagine. Basketball was definitely my first love for in terms of playing, but football from the get-go has always been my favorite to watch.
And how did you find out about fantasy football?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things I've actually never got to talk about this before on a podcast or anything like that. I briefly mentioned it to people and stuff like that, but
Hmm.
my dad's been the biggest inspiration for this because like when I was little, he always used to play fantasy football and different kind of fantasy games and stuff, and I was just always interested in it because I'm a competitor. That's one thing you'll probably hear over and over in the podcast. Like I am just unhealthy competitive that like I'm not a sore loser at all. I don't get upset if I lose, but like if we're competing, I'm competing to win. I'm not ever competing to have fun. Like if there's winning involved, I want to win. So fantasy football is one of those ways that I could, try to win. It's one of those things that I can control myself that I know there's no I in team, but in fantasy football it is like there is an I in your own team. So it was one way for me to compete. And I used to watch my dad play and I was like, "Dad, can I play? Can I play? Can I play?" And around, I would say when I was 10 years old, he started letting me doing pigskin pick'em on ESPN, where every week you're just picking the teams that you wanted to win. And I
Yeah.
enjoyed that. And then one of the things that most people wouldn't remember, but my first ever fantasy game was this thing called Fantasy Gridiron on ESPN. And basically what Fantasy Gridiron is, it's like fantasy football, but it was with like a salary cap value. So all you have is a starting lineup. There's no bench. And based on how your players perform, they go up in salary or they go down. So if they went up, then I could trade them for someone of equal value. So if Adrian Peterson played really well, then I could trade up for like a Peyton Manning because he got to that higher value, if that makes sense. But that was
Yeah.
my first fantasy game. I did that. And then I also grew up on Eliminator, like survivor pools, picking a team every week. So for like from when I was 10 until I was 16, when I played my first ever fantasy league with my friends, every year it was pigskin pick'em, gridiron, and eliminator. And it used to frustrate me because like I told you, I'm a competitor.
Yeah.
And those years I could never beat my dad. And to this day, my dad is so good at it. And I think like I know more about him in like general fantasy stuff now because I'm an analyst, even though it's a silly word. I like to talk about fantasy football and research it. But my dad was my biggest inspiration because like I always wanted to beat my dad. And that's what got me so into fantasy football. Because every year I actually spent time wanting to research and stuff because like how can I beat my dad even though I never could. But he's been my biggest inspiration, my biggest supporter, and I'm sure we'll get into all that later. But that's how I started.
Awesome. Awesome. And when you decided to branch out from just, playing in, how many leagues do you play in now?
So right now, I've gone up actually every year since I've started. I've gone up in leagues, I think. So last year I did 11 leagues, and that's the most I'd ever done. Right now, I'm scheduled for 12 total drafts, but I anticipate that number will probably hit maybe 13 or 14, depending on if I get invited to something else or if I just get that itch for an extra draft. Because like, if I can just say this, because people always say you're psycho for doing 11 or 12 leagues, but for me, I spend ridiculous amount of hours all summer reading articles, projections, all of this stuff. So I feel like I'm not doing myself justice if I'm only playing in like 3 or 4 leagues because I spend all this time. And I'd be so mad if I played only 3 or 4 and I didn't win one after how much time I spend. So if I'm playing like 12 or 13, I'm like, I'll at least win a couple. But like, again, waivers and stuff like that is where I thrive. I think it's one of my biggest fantasy strengths. So even in 12 or 13 leagues, that's my bread and butter is finding guys in waivers, trying to identify key players and stuff like that. So that's one thing I always like to do. That's why I like to do a lot of leagues because the more waivers I can be in on, the more I feel like I have an advantage because I think that's one of my biggest strengths in fantasy football.
That's awesome. So when you look at it from having players, the same players on various teams versus having like an array of players, and then you're going up against guys who have the same people you have in other leagues. Like, how do you find a balance there so that you don't feel like you're going to stress out over it no matter what?
Well, it's a weird thing for me. So, I mean, when I play, obviously, like anytime there's a touchdown, it's usually a good thing. But like, I always focus on about like 2 or 3 leagues. So like, I have a main league of record that I run on Instagram with like random people I met. That's been the most fun thing ever. I started a league last year, got 9 other guys, and I got 8 out of 9 to come back. And we added one more because the only reason the one guy that didn't come back is because he had like kids and he was selling a house, so we couldn't. But like, it's been so fun to run a league, get input, and meet these people in real life. I actually met one of the guys in my league at the expo for the first time, which was cool. Again, that's a story for later. But what I was saying was, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting your question. Oh, how do I balance it? Sorry. So I focus on 2 or 3 leagues. So I focus on that league, and then I kind of focus on the league I do with my dad every year that he's been in for, I think it's 25 years now. So we do an IDP league together, and I focus on those 2. And those are the main ones that I'm looking at for who's going up against who. But I will say, Casey, Mondays are not fun for me because I have 11 leagues going, and that's when I actually care about my other leagues and who's doing well. And it's like, okay, I need this guy to score this touchdown, but it has to be from 30 yards instead of 40 yards because that'll make me lose this week. So Mondays are stressful and they're tough because I feel like I'm playing a high wire act of like, how do I win the most amount of leagues? But for the most part, on Sundays, I'm just focused on my main team and the league with my dad and how those guys play out. And that's what I'm mostly worried about. But then, if there's other leagues that I'm doing really well in, I want those teams to do better. But I'm mostly focused on my main 2 or 3 teams. But like I said, Mondays are not fun.
With the IDP aspect of it, a lot of people either haven't attempted to play IDP or they've played it and they're not sure it's their cup of tea or whatever. Being somebody that plays IDP, what do you think is the biggest reason people are turned off from playing IDP? And then what do you think should be a selling point for playing IDP?
I think the biggest turnoff is just the time. Because I think like most people, they know all the wide receivers. They know your Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, even the most casual fan. But no one cares about really like Devin White or Darius Leonard. Like obviously they know the names, but when you get beyond that and you have guys like Kazir White for the Chargers, people listening to this podcast have probably never heard of Kazir White, and they don't care about those defensive players that don't get enough recognition because in IDP, your Jalen Ramseys or your Stephon Gilmores, the cornerbacks that people know about don't matter. And it's more about random guys that get a lot of tackles and sacks. So I think that's a reason that people don't do it. But I think the biggest selling point that, and I'll be honest, like if someone's listening to this, like I never want to play IDP, I felt that way. My dad had an IDP league. I said, I'll do it. And I fell in love when I found out that I was watching on Sunday. And then like Devin White for the Bucs last year was our star player. And watching Devin White scream across the line to get a sack on 4th down was so exciting. And every time he makes a big tackle, like it enhances your fantasy experience. And it's the reason I love fantasy football. Because if I didn't play fantasy football, I wouldn't give a crap about any other game but the Patriots or big games. So it makes it so every game I watch is exciting. And then when you bring defense into it, that's more players you get to watch. You get to have your guys on offense and you have guys on defense making tackles. So like every time you're watching, it just enhances the experience. But I get it's too much time for people. But for the people willing to take a time, there is nothing like watching your middle linebacker run in and get a big sack on the quarterback to give you a few extra points. So I love that about IDP, that it gives you more players to watch during a game, which is part of the most fun part about fantasy football is watching the guys that we have on our teams get to play.
Yeah. And I've done IDP before and just to try it out. And like you said, time was a big reason why I did, but it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I really am intrigued by IDP. So that's pretty cool. You brought up the Patriots, so we're not going to just skip over that. We were talking beforehand about me being a Cowboys fan and you're a Patriots fan. Are you from the Boston area?
I am from the Boston area. I was born and bred in Boston. There's no other team I love but Boston for everything. Basketball, football, baseball, hockey, don't matter. It's Boston all the way. I'm absolutely not a bandwagon. The only thing that I would say I'm a little bit of a bandwagon for is wherever Tom Brady plays. Because, I mean, he changed my childhood. And I know people don't like Tom Brady because he's took it. But, like, that was life-changing for me to get to watch him growing up. And I hate Patriots fans that are like, this guy's a traitor. I mean, he gave us the 20 best years you could ever ask for from any NFL franchise. So wherever he goes, I owe him to root for him. If the Patriots are playing, I'm rooting for the Patriots all day. But otherwise, that's the guy that changed my life. And because he changed my life, I'm going to root for him because I owe him that loyalty for that. Patriots are my team, but otherwise, if Tom Brady goes somewhere else, I'm rooting for Tom Brady. I don't care if it's the Giants, the Jets, the Bills, the Cowboys. I'm going to root for Tom Brady because he changed my life.
And you know what? I've been on the bandwagon of Tom Brady. You know, I don't like Tom Brady, but like at the end of the day, you can't argue with the fact that he's done so much and like he's incredible. Like I'm not going to argue that. So I totally feel you. And the same thing. Like if you know, I wish the Cowboys could have something like that. Like recent, you know, when I was 7, they had something like that going on, but. You know, 7 and 37. There's a big, you know, so. So also I want to know, since you're a Patriots fan and everything, how is the situation with like the quarterback going on right now? I've had Tom Everett Scott on and we talked about, because he's a Patriots fan as well. Okay. And we talked about last year he liked Cam prior to Cam actually, you know, starting. How do you feel about that situation? I know this isn't a fantasy show, but this is your team. So
I love Cam. I'm a big believer in Cam, and I think the thing that people ask me, my friends ask me, because again, like again, going back to that analyst thing, like I'm not like a fantasy football analyst. I just happen to research more than people, and I share my opinions. Doesn't mean that I know anything more. I just spend a lot of time on it. But with Cam, I love Cam. I think Cam should start this year. I think Cam's going to be great, because the thing that people don't realize about Cam Newton is last year Damiere Byrd was his wide receiver 1, and he has a whole new top 4 this year in Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, those guys. That's a whole new top 4. That's with Jacoby Myers getting better. That's with Damian Harris getting better. That's with this offensive line improving. That's with guys coming back on defense. I didn't think Cam got a fair shake, because you saw Brady's last year. Everyone thought he was cooked, but then you gave him good weapons and he was better. The other thing I'll say, I know people, it's not a fantasy show, but Cam Newton last year with that dumpster fire of a team had the second best pass completion percentage of his entire career. And you're going to tell me that this guy's washed and he's a bum. I'm not saying Mac Jones isn't good. I'm not saying that. Mac Jones is the future. But right now, to win now, Cam is probably going to give us the best chance possible to win a Super Bowl this year.
And so that takes me into this question. It has nothing to do with that, but it does have to do with the fact that you said that so perfectly. How did you decide like you could do something in the fantasy football space other than just play? You could actually talk about it, write about it, do, you know, anything that you want to nowadays. How did you figure that out? And what was that process like?
So like, how did I start my podcast and decide?
Yeah. How did you decide like, hey, I can do that? Like, did you just randomly come across like Twitter, or how was it?
It's actually a pretty funny story, and actually a story that I was actually not willing to tell at the first part. I always just kind of gave a broad example because I felt bad about it. Yeah. So the reason was, this is about last year. I actually started, my first episode ever was July 25th, 2020. But about 2 weeks before that, a couple of my friends that both go to the school I go to Suffolk University in Boston, they said, let's start a podcast. Let's talk about Boston sports and stuff like that. So we're going to talk about the Patriots, because the Patriots season was upcoming, and we did 1 or 2 episodes, and like we didn't like have a person that was a host, and it was just all over the place, and it was just for fun for them. But I'm someone, like I said, I'm competitive. I want someone to be really good. And again, I like doing it with them. I would have still done it with them if they wanted to continue. But when we made that podcast, I was like, you know what? I feel like I could make my own podcast and could be good, because this is fun. I like doing the podcast. I like talking about sports and stuff like that. So what would I want to talk about? And I was like, fantasy football, because I spend ridiculous hours and all that. And like, I don't think I'm the greatest fantasy football player of all time, but I'm going to tell you that I probably do more research and I spend more time on it than you do. So why not just share my opinions that from all this time I waste, looking at snap counts and stuff like that, and just share my opinions. And I decided, you know what, let's just start a podcast and start with that, a little Instagram page, because like I like reading others' posts, and I felt like I had something to share. And from there, I started doing the podcast, and I fell in love. And I'm so thankful to this day. And I've told the people that listened at the beginning, like I listened back to my first episode and I cringed, and I was like, oh my goodness, why did anyone tell me I'm doing a good job? Because people were my friends and family were so nice, but that was so good for me, because I needed that positive reinforcement, and it helped me to keep going. And every episode I did, I fell more and more and more in love with it. And I loved making podcasts so much all last year. And of course, there were times where I had school or other things in the way, and I was like, screw this. Like, I don't want to record an episode. But like when I get down and I hit the record button and I have all my notes ready and the lights just turn on, I love it. I love talking about football. I love trying to tell you why you should believe in something, because I'm competitive. I want to be right, and I want you to know why I think I'm right. So even if I'm wrong, you're like, well, Alex made a good case. So I love that aspect of it, and that's why I fell in love with doing a podcast and Twitter and TikTok and stuff like that, because I want to convince people because of that competitive. Like, I want to tell you why you should win. I want to win, all of that, and I get all about it. But that's how I started into it, and that's how I started to fall in love with it.
No, and I love that. And you can see it on your face. I know this isn't a visual podcast, but he's very, very, very smiley and excited about it. So that's super dope. And I really love that. And the fact that you went off and I can do this. And a lot of people are scared to start out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like you had nerves and everything else. How did that first podcast, like what was going through your mind? How did you feel the very first time you did your podcast?
As I was doing it or after?
As you were doing it or right before it, even up to it.
Yeah, so I really had no idea what to think. I was scared because I was like, one, who's going to listen to this? Like, who on earth is going to listen to it besides like my friends and family? But it was so nerve-wracking recording for the first time because I'm like, I don't know really what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm doing. Because my first episode was just like, it wasn't an episode about like actual content. It was more the stuff I was going to cover. I was like, I'm going to talk about waivers this year, start, sit, breakouts, busts. And I was just talking about all the things before I got into my actual episodes. But like when I finished, I was like, I enjoyed that, but I was also still nervous that like, no matter what, and you know this, I'm sure, is like, as a content creator, it's scary creating content and trying to have new ideas and are people going to like it? But it's also scary when you're sitting there talking to a microphone and you're like, you don't know what people are going to think or how it's going to come out. So I think that was nerve wracking for me because I'm self-conscious of that. And I don't want people to judge me or tell me it's bad and stuff like that. But early on, I don't think like I think I cared a lot more what people thought and stuff like that. And I was thankful to have a lot of people that were very kind and complimentary. But as you were saying, like the question is, how did you feel the first time? I was terrified. I was so nervous about how people were going to feel. But I knew right when I was doing it that I loved it.
Yeah.
And after I started realizing that I loved it, I stopped caring about what people feel. And I realized if I'm just me, I give the best information I can possibly give. And it doesn't matter what people are going to say because I did the best I can possibly do. And from there, I stopped caring. But early on, I was definitely very scared. And I still get scared to this day, but I'm a little bit more confident. I give a lot less of a crap about what people think.
So starting podcast, was that your first step into podcasting, was, with your friends and everything and your own, branching off and doing it on your own, or had you guest on other podcasts, or was it just thrown to the wolves and try it out and see how it goes?
It really was thrown to the wolves and try it out. And it was funny because like that summer is when I ever first started listening to fantasy football podcasts. Before, when I was a little bit more casual, but I spent a lot of time, it was just me reading every article on breakouts, busts, and sleepers that I could possibly find. Those were the things that were easy for me to find. Those were the things that I loved. I didn't really care about the strategy and zero RB or stuff. I don't need to know that. I just need to know who is good, and I'll figure out the rest. And then eventually I started listening to podcasts, and I was like, oh my goodness, like there's all these people that have these good opinions and stuff like that. And I think at first I took every single person's opinion and it just had to be right. And then now I'm like, okay, I can figure out the stuff that's fluff and the stuff that's like, really good, hard hitting stuff, which I love. But like you said, like because I listened to podcasts and I enjoyed them so much, that's part of what inspired me to do it. And I'm starting to forget your question already. But no, like once we started and we were listening to it, I wanted to start my own and kind of get into that from there. But my only podcasting experience before I started my own was just those 2 episodes I did with my friends. And then from right there, it was me hosting my own show, thrown to the wolves, doing it all by myself, just trying the best that I could. And again, you know this as well as I do. It's such a trial and error process. You're not going to get everything right. But the biggest thing that I did is just like I constantly was just like trying to find how I can do better. And every time I got better, it felt good. And every time you get a win and you listen back and you're like, that was a good episode. That inspired me to keep doing it. But like you said, I had no experience going into it before, in short, and I really was just thrown to the wolves. But I think that really helped me because I didn't have any expectations. Because if I wasn't thrown to the wolves, I had no experience. I didn't expect anything. So every victory I got, every compliment I got was like, wow, I wasn't expecting anything like that. So every time one of those things happened, it made the process so much more enjoyable. And it really helped me to keep, grinding after that and wanting to do more.
With the trial and error thing too, going into it, you don't have any idea how to make a podcast, how to edit, how to do all this stuff. How did you figure out how to do all of that stuff?
Well, so the thing that I did is I just looked up what's the best way to podcast, and I found that the thing that came up was Anchor, because Anchor is free. So I would just sit on a Zoom, or I didn't have Zoom at first. It was actually, I didn't have a microphone. So I would literally have my phone here. People can't see it, but I'm holding up my cell phone. And I'd literally have the Anchor app open on my phone, and I would just hit record. And either it was laying on my desk or in my hand, and I would just read my notes and try to my best and just hold the thing and just record purely based off of that. And then when I had guests on, I would invite them on a Zoom, and I'd just record on Anchor in the background. But the editing stuff, I honestly tried to do as little editing as possible because I had no idea how. And so for my whole season last year, I never did any editing. I would
Mm-hmm.
just like record, and as long as I spoke right at the start and I ended it right at the end, I didn't need to record anything in the middle. And if I misspoke or anything like that, I would just step right over it and just try to, you trip, but you just keep running forward. So I never really had to edit stuff, but it was
Mm-hmm.
more getting my timing down for starting the recording and just making sure that I was always trying to speak as fluidly as possible. That's a process when you don't edit, but it helped me so much because if I didn't worry about screwing up, and like when I would just screw up, it's like, just keep going, just keep going. And that helped me by not editing because it
Mm-hmm.
forced me to find different ways to, when you trip and stumble and you're like, oh, and you get back up and you keep going, right? So that's how
Yeah.
it was with my speaking. So I didn't
Yeah.
worry about editing. It was just every time I misspeak, just keep going and try to do it. And I've gotten better and better and better that you don't even hear me trip now because I'm so good at catching my balance, I guess, with my voice. It doesn't mean I'm good at anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I'm a lot better now at just keep going with the flow, and it helps it so I don't have to worry about editing and stuff like that because I don't enjoy the editing part of it. I just like talking about football. So as little editing as I have to do is great, but I'm starting to get into using like Audacity and stuff like that to edit at least a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
that'll help me out in the long run.
Yeah, I use Audacity right now, and like I'm learning new things every day. And now I don't like editing. When I first started out, I was like over editing. I was going in and trying to take out it. Really, you don't need to do that. If you want to clean it up, you have the time, then yeah, but it's a lot of work, and it
Yeah,
just is. And now there's programs out there that'll like go and like flag where the ums are. You could just go there and it'll take
yeah,
it out. It's crazy the kind of technology we have now.
that's,
Oh, as I run out of air here. Also, I'm not that great of talking and like catching my balance. I'm pretty much the type of person that trips over their words constantly, and you guys have to like bring me back in with it. But it's cool to be able to have that conversation and that flow. And you were talking about having guests on your podcast as well. How do you get guests to come onto your podcast, and how do you make sure that you guys have a good, communication and banter going back and forth so that people are entertained?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in regards, the other thing I want to say about the tripping thing, real quick, that you said is like, I still trip over my words all the time, and I'm better at catching my balance. But I think that's one of the things that I enjoyed about listening to podcasts and stuff like that. Like, doesn't make me happy, but sometimes I laugh at someone tripping over your words, and it makes it better if
Yep.
you just sit there and you're like, haha, like I misspoke, and that's funny. People think that's funny when you misspeak,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just like, I'm an idiot, I
Mm-hmm.
misspoke, and I think that's one thing that helps. But in terms of guests, from the beginning, it was just I was on Instagram primarily at first, and it was just, you know what? Let me just shoot my shot. Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And I was just like, if I get no's and no's and no's, that's fine. But all I need is one person to say yes. And that's been my mindset from the beginning is any person that's willing to say yes, I go in as prepared as I possibly can be to impress them. Because if I impress them, that helps me give me credibility for the next person. So from the beginning, it was just, who can I get on? I didn't care who it was. It was just people that I saw or I followed on Instagram or Twitter now. And I just said, do I want this person on my podcast? If yes, I spent hours before this season. I wrote down 80 names I wanted on my podcast. And then I went through each person's social media. What's the best way to contact them? So if it was Instagram, because they had way less followers than Twitter, I would write down Instagram and I'd write down their handle and find ways to do that this year. But from the beginning, it's just purely been, who can I find? If I have a way to contact them, email, DM on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, email, it didn't matter. It was just, if I have a way to reach them, I'm going to shoot my shot. And if you say no, oh well, I'm going to get someone else that will, because people have been so nice. And I haven't gotten a lot of no's, honestly. People have been so
Mm-hmm.
generous and stuff like that. But like I said, it's that constant hustle that if you're willing to say yes for me, it is my life's mission in that moment to make sure I have the best possible podcast I have, so you want to come back. Because if I get
Right.
you to come back, I can get someone else to come back. So that's what I
Mm-hmm.
think is when you said, how do you keep the banter going? And how do you do that? Well, my thing is like, I'm always prepared. So I don't worry about the banter and stuff like that anymore. Because if I'm prepared and I show I know what I'm doing, they might think I'm a joke at first and I'm just some kid that they're coming on to talk to the podcast. But when they see early on that Alex is prepared, he knows what he's going to say. I'm not saying I'm the best podcaster in the world. I'm never saying that. But I'm going to be as prepared as I possibly can be. And I always have that to bank on. And that makes the banter and that makes everything else different. So I would just say to anybody is just, one, make sure you're prepared, and just two, be you. That's something people told me very often when I asked for like, what should I do? How do you podcast? And they said, just be yourself. Because if I tried to be Alex, the podcast personality or whatever, I wasn't going to get anywhere. And you can only put that facade up for so much. So from the beginning, I didn't worry about banter. I was like, let's just be me. And if
Mm-hmm.
people like me, great. If people don't, oh well, like screw you. So I just was me. I was prepared, and that helped. That literally was all I did. Be as prepared as you possibly can be, and just be you. Don't try to be anyone else. And I struggled with that at first, but the more I did that, the more it became easier to do banter because I wasn't bantering from a personality. I was just bantering from Alex. Like it was my friends. And like, again, when you're giving good takes and you're not good takes, but you're giving well-researched takes and stuff like that, it gives you confidence. And that confidence leads to the banter. It keeps the conversation going. And that's how you get to where you need to get to in terms of keeping the podcast flowing and all that kind of stuff.
And, speaking of being prepared, to be prepared, I went and listened to your last episode to kind of get an idea of how because I've heard your podcast, but I'm one of those type of people that like I listen to podcasts while I'm doing other things. So I don't catch every, little part of it. And to go back and listen to it and how you just said earlier that you don't edit really. And, you if you stumble, you keep going, you can't tell, which is super awesome. So you can tell that with practice, it's gotten like this nice package that you have now, which is really cool and inspirational to people out there who are just starting,
Yeah.
It's just
absolutely. One question real quick.
Yo.
Which episode did you listen to?
It was the episode that I listened to was the one from yesterday, the episode 88.
With Drew Ozenchuk?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man.
I listened to that.
That was one of the rare episodes this year that I was not happy with myself. Drew is one of the best guests I ever had.
One of
my favorite people in the industry. And I thought he carried, but I listened to it back and I was like, oh my goodness, Alex. Because that day, just a little context for people. I know people care less, but I worked from like 9 to 3 that day. And then before the Drew episode, I had like 3 podcasts that day. So I'd already been on podcast 4 or 5 hours, whatever. And I got onto his, and because he's in Pacific time and I'm in Eastern time, we were recording at like midnight or 1 a.m. and I was so tired. And I listened to it back and I was like, oh, I can hear it in my voice. I just sound so tired. I didn't have the energy I usually try to bring, but it was still a good episode because Drew is phenomenal in every sense of the word. But for my own performance, I was like, Alex, come on, like gotta do a little better. But I'm my own toughest critic, and that's the only way that you can get better. So
you really are. I have had people on this show say that they've listened back to their answers and how they came off on here or whatever, and that they were like, man, I didn't really feel like I was on my game. It didn't sound that great. And to me, I'm like, what are you talking about? It was awesome. And you get the feedback, and the feedback's always positive. So it happens. But you could not tell. I could not tell. And like when I had Mike Wright on, like I had Mike Wright and then Pat Mayo on the same day, and it was like the crappiest day I had in a really long time. So I was like, oh my god, so luckily for me, those guys can carry conversations too. But so I want to go and talk more about like how you've used social media, because it is very important nowadays in the fantasy football community. Social media is everything, and you've been able to kind of get your hand in a bunch of different social medias platforms. And I'm old, so I'm like over here like I just got off Facebook yesterday, but like you were talking about Instagram, you're talking about TikTok, and there's not a lot of fantasy TikTok and fantasy Instagram in comparison to Twitter. So how did you find a space in there, and how did that come about on both of those?
So the Instagram thing was just because like I had followed so many fantasy accounts. I didn't have a Twitter page really or use it at the time. Instagram was what I used for my fantasy content. Besides, it was mostly Google and reading articles. But like on Instagram, that was the way I did it. So I figured, why not start my own Instagram page with the podcast? Because I figured if I can find people on Instagram, that's how I'll get people to listen to my podcast. By the more ways I can advertise, the better. But I'll be honest, I hated Instagram, and not because the people were bad. I hated making graphics. Like with editing, I cannot stand making graphics and trying to because I spent more time doing graphics than I did my research. I just wanted to, like Twitter, I just wanted to write my stuff and then just put it out there. I didn't want to have to make a cool graphic and stuff because everyone else was better at graphics than I was. And my dad works in graphic design and he would try to help me. And I was just like, Dad, like I hate graphics. I don't want to do this. So this season I was like, let me just focus on Twitter. And then I also said, someone actually suggested to me, try TikTok. And I was like anti-TikTok at the time. I just didn't get the hype about it. I didn't really watch TikTok. And then I started watching some fantasy football people on TikTok. And I was like, it just hit me. I was like, oh my goodness, like I can do this. Because like the thing is, what did I just say? I don't like graphics. I just like to give my information out. So what I would do with TikTok is I just said, I'd find podcast notes and I just figure out a way where there was a player and I had to take on a player. And in TikTok, let's just find a way to do it under a minute. So it's not Instagram. I don't have to make graphics. It's just like Twitter. Either I type it out or I just look at my camera and I say it. And there's a little bit of editing and stuff with TikTok, but I found ways to make it super easy for myself so it doesn't take me long to edit and I don't have to do anything fancy. But I like TikTok because for me, it was like, I don't have to do graphics. I can just say the takes I already research in my podcast, and it makes it really easy for me to do. I'm at the point, though, where I don't have, like, I've used up all my podcast stuff, so I'm trying to come up with new stuff, which is difficult sometimes on TikTok. But I like it because, again, I don't have to make graphics, and not making graphics makes me happy. But like you said, TikTok and Twitter were great ways because I didn't have to do graphics for me, and they were good ways to get my information out quick. I could focus on the big bullet points because, like, I know people hate fluff. And they hate the biggest thing. That's why I like TikTok and Twitter, because I can give you my favorite 2 or 3 stats in a minute or in 280 characters on Twitter. And that's the best way to give people information. And I found that was the most effective way, because when I was researching, I can find good stuff. And let me just, on Twitter, TikTok, whatever, I'm going to give you the best 2 or 3 points. And that's how I convince you. And that's how I can rope you in. And that's how I get people to listen to my podcast. Because I say, I go more in depth in my podcast. So if they like my 2 or 3 big points, then they can come onto the podcast. And it extends into everything else. That's the last thing I'll say, and I'll stop rambling, is with TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. It didn't matter. It was just, how do I get people to listen to my podcast or look at other platforms? Because everything extends into each other. So if you like what I'm doing on Twitter, where else is Alex? Oh, he's on TikTok. There's more ways I can listen to him. Or the podcast, more ways I can listen to him for people that like my content, whatever, which is a few people, a lot of people, little people, doesn't matter to me. It's just more ways to reproduce your content and to market it in different ways and to get people to catch on, because that's the biggest way I've been able to grow some kind of audience, is trying to bring it in from as many platforms as possible. And that's been the biggest way of me gaining in other platforms quicker than other people, because I'm on so many different places. So people find me from other places and end up finding me on the other places once again, because I extend through that.
Well, that's awesome. And maybe I do need to start looking into other avenues besides just Twitter, but I'm a creature of comfort and I'm one of, but yeah, because I was going to ask you more about promoting your podcast, because when you start out a podcast, getting it out and getting people to listen to it's kind of hard, So do you have any tips or tricks for people who are just starting out that are wanting more people to listen to what they're putting out?
Yeah, huge tip. And this is the biggest thing that I learned. And like, I don't have like a huge audience, but the biggest reason that I was able to get like an audience starting from zero was just getting people to come on and getting free exposure. I didn't want to spend money on ads because I don't have that much yet and I'm still getting better. So like we talked about earlier, who can I get on my podcast? If you have a podcast, it doesn't have to be about fantasy football. It can be about anything. But if there's people you want to talk to, reach out to as many people as possible, because all I needed them to do is retweet or post to their followers that they have a thing. And it might be 1% or 1 in every 1,000 people that follow them that like my podcast. That's all I needed. Is if I get 1 or 2 people from every single person, that audience is going to grow. And when that audience grows, it extends into more people and more people. So it was just like, find as many ways to get free exposure as possible. It could be going in the comments of one of those big people and commenting, because it's wherever you can find their large audience and give them a reason to come see you. Just like I said with Twitter or TikTok, if I see a comment from me on Mike Wright's post and his 100,000 followers, well, that's 100,000 people that might see that one little stat I put out and say, okay, what does he have going on? So it's just constantly trying to find ways of free exposure, whether in comments or getting people on your podcast, and finding different ways to put yourself in front of people without having to pay for it. That's my biggest thing, is just trying to get other people and use the kindness of strangers to help get yourself out. And like, what did I talk about earlier? Preparation. Because if people come to listen to me and give the opportunity, whether it's a guest or a person, I want to be as prepared as I possibly can, because that keeps people. And that the more you grow, the easier it is to grow even more. And it's that whole thing. It leads back to preparation and all of that all together. So
being prepared is very important. So I'll agree with that sentiment and cannot talk. And then I want to know more about TikTok, because I live under a rock. I use TikTok for watching my friend post videos of her children. So like, that's the extent of TikTok that I really know. And I know there's trends and all that jazz, but you're using it for something completely different than dancing and all that. So, exactly what do you do on TikTok for the people that haven't seen your TikTok yet?
Yeah, so on TikTok, it's all about fantasy football and stuff. I don't think I could do the comedy stuff and the funny videos. I don't dance like at all. I don't really like going to the beach, and I'd rather be at the beach than on a dance floor. It's the most uncomfortable place for me because I'm tall. I have awkward body movements, and I don't like dancing and doing that kind of thing. So what do I do well? Fantasy football. So let me talk about that on TikTok because I'm confident in it. I'm confident in my research. So on TikTok, I always do less than 1 minute videos. I find a take that I like, whether it's about a certain player or a certain topic, like people I think are going to do good, people I think are going to do bad. I mean, doing fantasy drafts and my dream draft, stuff like that. So I talk about anything and all things fantasy football and trying to find different ways that I can talk about my takes and some of the stuff and notes I have in my podcast to get to people. And one of the reasons that I like TikTok is because you can get people the information in a minute or less. And because it's a minute or less, it exposes it to so many more people because I don't need thousands upon thousands of people. No one wants to listen to a 1 hour podcast. They're like, Alex, run on your little hamster wheel and tell me in 1 minute or less why I should be listening to this. And that's why TikTok has been successful, because I can run on my little hamster wheel and produce 1 minute videos for people. And that's how they can get their content easily and stuff like that. So like I said, TikTok, I just talk about fantasy football and I try to give people takes on different topics in 1 minute or less.
And one of the reasons that I was like, holy crap, I got to get this kid on my show is because I had seen the tweet about how you had hit a milestone with your TikTok followers and you're almost at 23,000 on TikTok, which is crazy to even think that and you're doing it. You're like really putting in the work and doing it. So how does it feel to see that number?
It's unbelievable. It's the craziest thing. And people that I talk to them, I look up to, they say the same thing. It's like, I'm just Alex. You know, like I don't view myself as a celebrity. And when people ask me for advice because they think I know something, it's so weird to me because I'm just a normal guy, you know. I mean, I eat my cereal in the morning and I go to school and then I come back and I sleep, you know, just like a normal person. But it's pretty incredible that there's enough people out there, like you said, almost 23,000 now, that are willing to follow me because they like my fantasy football takes. Like that is just the weirdest thing for me. But again, like I said, I work hard and I'm prepared, but the fact that people enjoy stuff like that, or when you get a lot of views on a video, it's a pretty amazing feeling. And I'd be lying to you if I said I don't love to celebrate those things. When those things happen, I love going home to my friends or my parents or whoever and being like, guess what? I got this many views, or I hit this milestone of followers. And like, I love getting to talk about that. I love getting to achieve the goals, and I love seeing the whole process, how those things work. But like you said, like the fact that 23,000 people almost are willing to follow me on TikTok is pretty amazing and pretty special, and something I'm super grateful for every single day, that people are willing to listen to me. Like that means more to me than anything, that people comment, or that even one person likes my videos or likes my take. Like that means so much to me, let alone a higher number of people. And again, we're just trying to grow. And like one of the other things with TikTok, why it's been successful, is because there aren't a lot of fantasy football TikTok people. There's a lot of people on Twitter. There's a lot of people on Instagram, but TikTok's relatively new. And that's one of the things that was attractive for me, is because there's not a lot of people. But like you said, you're not familiar with TikTok. Well, a lot of other people aren't familiar, and a lot of people aren't making fantasy stuff. So if I can be one of the first people to do fantasy content, that's, I think, partly why I've grown, my platform has grown quickly, is because there's not a lot of people, and I try my best to give good information. So if I happen to give good information and people like it, I'll get more and more people, because there isn't a lot of competition. Twitter, you know as well as I do, there's a lot of really great people. Yep. So I'm competing with a ton of people every day to put out the best content I can. But TikTok, it's a lot smaller people that I'm competing with. But like I also said, I only have to get your attention for a minute or less. So it's exposed to a lot more people, and it gives a lot more people chances to listen to me. And I think the fact that there's not a lot of people that do it, it gives people a lot of chances because it's short. And if I can, like I said, if I can just find 3 points that get you interested, I can get someone like that back. I think those are the biggest reasons why I've been able to grow so far.
And I love the fact that you keep bringing up it being short thing, because I think that most people, when they read articles, are just skimming articles anyway. So for you to be able to, like you said, get the fluff out, because, you know, articles, a lot of times, you know, you're reading an article where the person's being told that they need to write a certain amount of words. So obviously there's going to be fluff in it, and it just happens. And so it is cool for you to like go in there and find the pieces that are actually important and bring those out. And I think that's what Twitter and TikTok have that going for them, because it's so short. I never have been on Clubhouse, but I was really jealous looking in at people who from the outside, because I was on Android, and everybody that had, you know, got my iPhone over here. And I thought that was going to be a thing. And I guess it's whatever it is now. I'm still not on it. But I've been always asking, like, do you think something else is going to take over? Do you think that Twitter's always going to be king? And I've always been trying to like get people to talk about TikTok, but nobody ever has anything to say about it. And they're like, there are people out there doing such a great job with TikTok that, you know, these creators that are doing such a great job putting out something that we've never seen before. People like yourself who are putting out something that we've never seen before. It's so awesome to see this refreshing new wave of stuff come in. Do you think that there's going to be more apps that are going to continue to take over with fantasy football? Or do you think that we're like at a nice core number? We don't need to grow anymore, you know?
I think there's always room for growth. You know, it's the world we live in. We never ever see things stay the same over the last 1 year, 10 years, 2 months, 3 weeks, 2 days. Everything's different every day, and people are always trying to find new ways to get information. And what's the new thing when the butterfly goes by that catches your eye? You know, so I think there's always going to be upgrading. But I think spaces like TikTok have potential. I think TikTok's a little tougher because it's videos and stuff like that, and people have to make new videos. Because it's different than Instagram, where it's just a picture. So you don't need to create a creative video. It's just a picture. Twitter, it's just words and stuff like that. So I think TikTok has the potential because it's like Instagram and Twitter, where you just need a short attention span. Because I think that's the things that get the most views. Is people don't want to spend an hour listening to a podcast. They don't want to listen to me in my sweaty room talk about all these fantasy football stats. No, they just want the big points in a minute or less because that's all they have time for. So I think that's why apps like Twitter and Instagram have stuck around in general beyond fantasy football, because people don't need a big attention span for it. I think that's why TikTok is great, because in almost all videos, it's a minute or less of why something's funny. It's a minute or less of why something's entertaining and stuff. And it's a little easier than something like YouTube, where you don't have to create super long videos. Just you have to only be entertaining for a minute. So it's easier to create content. It's easier to keep the attention of people because it's so much shorter. So I think it has a lot of potential. But like I said, it is tougher because you only can make videos on TikTok and stuff like that. And there's a lot of really, really, really great people across any part of TikTok. So I think that it's something that definitely has the potential to stay, because it stayed a lot longer and it's been on top for a lot longer. And as you said, TikTok has a really big audience everywhere. There's people I watch that get millions and millions and millions of views each and every day. And again, as long as people continue to get entertained by short entertainment span, and there's people that are willing to keep making those videos, I think it's something that, similar to Instagram or Twitter, that could last a long time.
And I mean, it's been instrumental for musicians. It's gotten songs back on charts that charted in the 70s. I mean, it's crazy what TikTok can do and the audiences you can reach. When you started out, when did you know that like TikTok was taking off for you?
It wasn't early on. It's tough early on because, like you talked about, I couldn't get guests on and stuff like that, so I wasn't getting as much free exposure. But it was like the first 2 weeks I did it, I had a video that I had like 500 followers at the time. They had like 100,000 views. And like TikTok has some kind of algorithm where the more watch time you get, the better. So I was like, what better way to do than like a mystery video? So the first video that blew up I did was on Jonathan Taylor. And I talked about all the reasons why Jonathan Taylor wasn't ideal for fantasy football, but I didn't say his name. And that kept people watching for longer, which led more and more people to do that. So I tried to tap into that for a while of just giving people reasons to spend more time watching it because they didn't know what my take was. And I've had people say, just give us the take and then talk about it. No, because if I give you the take, and you're not going to care about the rest of the video, you're just going to care about the take I told you. You're just looking for the headline. But if I can give you the mystery around the headline and like make you want to see to the end, even if you're tired of hearing me talk, you're going to listen to the end. That's how I help find a way to make views. So once I figured out, okay, that's how I can keep people along, it definitely helped a little bit better, or doing things in threes. So if I said something like, hey, Casey, I'm going to talk about 3 different players that I really like. So the first one is Alex. And Alex is great because of A, B, and C, right? You liked my take on Alex, you're going to listen to number 2. And then if you listen to number 2, you can go to number 3. And I found that was the biggest way for me to grow my audience, because if I can keep people or give them a reason to keep watching to the end of the video, that helped me grow really fast. And the other thing that was like big that I'm willing to do, that again, you talk about the dirty work and all kinds of sports and life and stuff like that, the people that do the dirty work. And the thing I was willing to do the dirty work about that people don't know is I found this awesome Twitter account. I feel like I'm giving away one of my biggest secrets called 32 Beat Writers. So when training camp started, every single day I would scroll through the entire feed of all the 32 beat reporters and the biggest news. And on TikTok, every night I would make a normal video during the day. And then at night, I would give people the 4 biggest pieces of news that I found. So I found my 4 biggest pieces of news, whatever it was. And in 25 seconds or 30 seconds or less, I would give you all the news that you need to know for the day. And those videos just took off. Like I've posted 20 of them, and I think like 16 out of 20 hit like 50,000 plus people, which is just, if I hit 50,000 one, I'm so beyond pumped. But it was just like a cheat code that if I just give people the big news and I state it correctly and in a good way, that's a lot of energy, it kept getting people to come back. So that helped me blow up because, again, if I give you one piece of news, you're like, holy crap, that's good news. You're going to listen to the second piece and the third piece and the fourth piece because I'm giving you good news. And that's the biggest thing. You have to keep people interested, and people lose their attention span quick. So again, in a minute video, the longer I keep you, the more people are going to see it. And that's been the biggest thing.
I love that. I love the way that your brain is working here with getting people to stick around and to engage with your stuff. Like, that's just awesome because a lot of people don't look at it that way and they want to, put it out all up front. I like how you're keeping people engaged. That's super great advice. People need to take that advice and for anything that they do, but especially social media, like stuff like that is very important to keep people engaged. So that's super dope advice. I want to go back, and you had brought up earlier that you listen to something back. Do you listen to yourself back often?
It's more just when I have time. So I think something I'll be able to do more now because like I have an apartment, so I'm going to be like cooking for myself or doing stuff like that where I can't be watching something at the same time.
Yeah.
So I definitely have started to listen to my podcast back more and more. And and again, I'd love to talk about this if we can in a little bit. Is kind of talking about advice and stuff like that and kind of how I learned. It's one of the biggest things that I'd want anyone to hear about, like that I'd love to get a chance to talk about. But like, sorry, I'm totally losing myself. What was the question?
Just about listening to yourself back.
Yeah. So that was one of the tips I got from someone was finding a way to listen back to my stuff. And when I would listen back, I don't like hearing myself speak at all. It's just weird for me. I don't like hearing myself or like cringing at my takes, but I found that there were certain phrases that I used too much of. I found that, okay, I see that certain times there would be a little bit of a break in the silence. And I just write like the same thing with the news, finding 2 or 3 ways. Every time I listen, what's 2 or 3 things that I can take away from that podcast that I can do better for the next one? So if I get a chance to listen, I'm like, okay, right away, I'm just listening for I don't listen to be like, hey, Alex, like nice take, dude, in my head. I don't listen for that. I'm listening to say, what's one thing I can find, one word I said or one phrase that I can fix for the next time that I say too much, or the pauses that I'm doing in between, or a better way to give a take or to transition. I'm always just looking for little ways that I can find a way to improve when I listen back. But I probably listened to about half of my episodes back in total.
Yeah, a lot of people come on here and they're like, I don't listen to myself talk. I don't want to hear it. And then a lot of people come on here and they're like, I listen for like, how does my voice sound? And, what can I do with my voice to make the inflection sound, better to people, So yeah, all that stuff is really important. Do you listen to any other podcasts to kind of get ideas and like listen, like what should I do? What shouldn't I do? You don't have to name names, but is that something you do?
I've never listened to any podcasts about like tips of how to be a better podcaster or anything like that. That was just more on my own and asking people that everyone I had on, I asked, and we can talk about that. But the biggest thing, I just listened to a lot of fantasy football podcasts. The biggest reason I did why is because the last 3 years, whenever I went home for the summer, I had this job at a pond. And because I was at a pond, I was doing a lot of like yard work and stuff like that. So I had so much free time, and like I like listening to music just like everybody else, but I needed something that would pass the time quicker. And that's how I found. I used to listen to true crime, and I was like, why don't I listen to fantasy football stuff so I can mow the lawn or rake leaves while hearing fantasy football takes? So I don't have to read. I'm doing 2 things at once. So I probably listen to about 6 or 7 different fantasy football podcasts right now. I don't listen to every episode of every podcast.
Yeah.
But I listen to all the most important ones that I think are the most beneficial for me for all those 6 or 7. And I mean, I probably listen to, I'd probably say about, at least 10 or 11 different podcast episodes a week. And I probably spend, maybe 8 to 10 hours, just because, again, that's just time when I'm doing work. I'm out walking or running, or it could be at the gym or walking from here to the grocery store. And just when those ways and I have time, I just love getting to listen to podcasts, and I love eating up information that I can learn, especially in fantasy football and stuff like that. But I also listen to like true crime and stuff that I just find interesting to help pass the time.
And Fresh Fantasy is the name of your podcast. I don't think we've actually said the name of your podcast. But how did you come up with the name of your quote unquote brand? How did you come up with that?
Honestly, that's a question I wish I could answer, because I started Fresh Fantasy about, like, I started an Instagram page I called Fresh Fantasy about, actually, I do know. I started it about a year before I actually made content. It
Yeah.
was what if I made fantasy content? What do I call it? Oh, fresh fantasy. And then a year later, I decided, oh my goodness, I'm actually going to start it now. And I already had the name picked out. So my inspiration actually came from Matthew Berry, because the original idea I had for my podcast, I love how he did start and sit, like that whole thing, love and hate. So what's love and hate? And my thing was going to be fresh and rotten. So it was always giving a fresh perspective and fresh takes, and who are going to be my fresh players for the week, who are going to be my rotten players for the week. So I kind of, stole off him, got the inspiration for it. But the idea of the fresh fantasy was giving fresh takes and stuff like that, and giving people a new perspective and stuff like that. And that actually extended naturally into my guests and stuff like that, because like I like to have a different guest on every week, because it's a fresh perspective and a new way for people to learn. Because if you're just listening to me talk, you're only going to hear my side of things. So if I'm bringing Casey on, or if I'm bringing this guy or that guy, everyone has a different opinion. And I learn so much from my guests and stuff like that, because I hear so many different opinions. And then you can take all those different opinions, all those fresh opinions, and, make them into different things and stuff like that. So I love that aspect of it for the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. But to answer your question, I got the name from the Matthew Berry doing love hate, because I want to do my own take on that, which was fresh and rotten. That's kind of how I got my name.
I like it. Did you always know you wanted to have guests on your podcast, or was that something that you kind of just came up with as you went?
I wouldn't say I did at the beginning, because I talked about being thrown into the fire. That's all it was. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea if I wanted to do guests. I didn't really have any idea of what I wanted to talk about. But I realized pretty quickly like how much it might help me to like find other people if I can just get people on my podcast. And then it became like a cool thing for me of like, what cool person that I look up to can I get on my podcast this week? And it was just reaching out to as many people as possible. But the second I decided, oh, it would be cool to get this person on, it just took off from there, and it turned into a mind of its own. But I don't think I really ever knew if I wanted a podcast guest. It just happened to pop into my head, and from there it just kind of took off into what it's turned into be.
And now you have so many episodes under your belt. Did you ever think that you'd have this many episodes of a podcast?
Absolutely not. Like, no way. I literally just started it for fun, and just as a way to do things. And like when I was first doing podcast stuff, and I started in late July, and it was like a month before the season. So like I didn't even have a set recording schedule. It was just like whoever I could get on for a guest, let's just make sure I post an episode at least once every 4 or 5 days. And I was able to get enough people to say yes. That I think I did 17 episodes before the season started, from like late July on. I was doing about 2 a week. And then I was doing 2 a week during the season, like one waiver episode every week for the guys that you should pick up off waivers. And then one episode for the fresh and rotten, like the guys that are fresh plays, guys that you should start this week, and the rotten ones, the guys that were going to, rot for your team and not do well. But I ended up doing 50 episodes my first season, and I'm up to, I think, about 30. I just recorded my 39th episode this morning for the season. But to answer your question, once again, I had no idea that I'd ever get to this point. I just did it for fun. I happened to fall in love with it, and I came back this year. I need to get this many episodes out. I need to do it this much. I was just like, you know what, let's just keep doing it. And the more I found that people were listening to it, the more I was like, how can I get better at this? And then it was, okay, I'm going to do a set schedule. We're going to keep reaching out to more and more guests and stuff like that. But it was just, I just did it because I enjoyed it. And that's really all it was for the first while. It never became a serious thing. And I still wouldn't call it a serious thing, because like, I don't really make almost any money off of this stuff. I don't do it for the money. I do it purely because I love talking about football. I think it's the coolest thing in the world that there is even one person besides like my dad that wants to listen to me talk like that. I don't listen for my own like ego trip and like, oh, like people are coming to listen to me, I'm so cool. No. I just like, because like I think it's cool that I get to talk about something that I'm passionate about, and that there's people willing to listen, and that's really special for me. That means a lot for me. And the more people that are like coming to listen to me talk, the more I want to do well for them, and I want to help them. So I don't want people to come back and be like, wow, like, thanks you clown. Like you didn't help me at all. Like I come in every day, like, how can I help people win? Because like the advice I give in my podcast are the advice that I use on my own team. Mm-hmm. I don't keep like advice away because I know that this guy in my league is listening to it. No, I give all my takes and stuff like that for absolutely everybody, and they're the same takes that I use in my own fantasy football teams. I only report the stuff that I would actually use for my own teams, and people happen to listen to it. And the fact that people listen to it makes me really happy, and it's really special for me, and it makes me want to continue to do it even more. But I absolutely love every single minute of it.
And how does it make you feel when somebody brings something up from a podcast? Like, they'll tweet at you, or they'll bring it up in conversation or whatever. How does that feel?
You have no idea how good it feels. Like, it is the most special thing in the world. And I'm sure my friends and family are tired of hearing about it, but like, part of the thing that like I heard, I don't know who it was, but it was some kind of great athlete that said like, what's the best part? Is it reaching the pinnacle? And they were like, no, it's the journey. And that's one of the biggest things I've tried to enjoy about doing this is like, it's not from being cocky or anything like that, but every time I get a win, that there's one person that gives me a good compliment, or there's one person that tweets this or that, I enjoy it. I celebrate it because like, I don't want to just get to like the biggest place that I want to get to and then enjoy it. I want to enjoy every minute of the grind and all the blood, sweat, and tears and all that because it takes a lot of time. So every time there's one person that brings something up or makes a comment, like that means the world to me. Like I just had my first ever in-person draft for my league of record, the first fantasy league I ever played. And like, it was so cool for me because like, I didn't even know, but there were guys in my league, like from my high school that listened to my podcast.
Wow.
And if even one person said to me, I listened to it, and even if they didn't like it, just the fact that they listened, that means the world to me. So for any person, no matter how big, small, I mean, wherever, like whatever it is, just any single human being on earth says, I like your podcast or like that I listen, like that means so much to me. And like that kind of positive reinforcement goes so far. So just one person, that's all I need is one person to say I enjoy it. And I talked about earlier, like my dad's my biggest inspiration. He's the only person probably to listen to all 88 episodes so far on my podcast, and just having him getting to listen and give me feedback and kind of doing this fantasy journey together because he's the one that brought me into it. He's like not my manager, but we love like talking about the episodes, what I could have done better, all the things that I can fix. We brainstorm ideas together, and that kind of camaraderie that keeps us close during the fantasy season, that we're calling each other during the week about our own team or about the podcast, stuff like that. It keeps me connected with him. But the point being, just the fact that there's one person out there that's willing to like support me and listen to me, like that's all I need. That's all the support I need. And that pushes me to keep doing that because I don't want to let them down. I want them to listen knowing that it's actually good, not listening just to support me, but that motivates me to keep trying to do my best.
And I wanted to bring up your dad again because I know how inspirational he's been in all this. And I think it's really cool that he's the reason why you got involved in fantasy football in the first place. Yeah. You know, a lot of us didn't have that as a opportunity, but it's really cool that you were able to do that. When you first said you were going to do this podcast and you were going to, you know, put content on the internet, what was your dad feeling? How was his reaction to all of that?
He thought it was so cool. He thought it was so cool that like I was going to do it. And like, I'm so beyond grateful. Like, I think I'm one of the luckiest human beings ever to be born because I have such a great support system with my mom, my dad, my stepdad. I have a great group of friends and stuff. That's the biggest thing. Like, whatever I do is because I have all these people that set me up to look great every day. And I'm not saying I look great, but I have all the people I could ever ask for and then some to support me. And when it comes to fantasy football, I have my dad. And not only is it a way for me to do podcasts, but it keeps us connected. It gives us a reason to talk every week. And it's not like we wouldn't be able to talk or like enjoy each other's company if there wasn't football, but it brings us together. When I'm at school and I'm not at home and I'm busy, I have a podcast. So it's a way that he can hear me talk, but then we talk about our podcast or our fantasy team. That's why I love fantasy football, because it brings people together. It helps you make connections with your friends, family, whoever it is. So getting to do that with him and like getting to kind of do the journey together, and like he's helping me, and like just enjoying getting to do that with him. And it's one of those ways that's brought us closer together, and it's a way to bond and stay in contact when I'm busy with school and stuff like that. So it's been a great like excuse almost to like keep us in contact and keep us, you know, together and stuff. It's brought us so much closer together getting to do it. Again, I'm not saying that we weren't close before. We already were, but it gave us one more reason that forced us, but like it gave us an opportunity to talk about something every single week, especially when I'm not home and stuff like that. So that's been a huge thing for me because it helped build our relationship even more, getting to do this together and, you know, just trying to be the best we can be. And like, we love to celebrate any big moments, even if it's just one person, random person that like, I don't even know, no profile picture on Twitter. And they're like, I like your podcast. And like, I go home and I tell them about it and we smile and laugh. And like, this is the weirdest thing, but you know, we do it together. And that's all that matters to me, is that we're doing it together. We're enjoying it. And that's the biggest thing for me.
That's super rad. I try to get my dad involved in fantasy football, and I think he does a couple of like, you know, the pools and all that stuff. But fantasy football, like one day I'll get him involved in it. But it's really cool that you guys have that camaraderie and that relationship there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, if I can say with that, is the other reason that's been cool and kind of helped inspired me is, like I talked about earlier, my dad is so good at it. Like he doesn't spend as much time, I think, as he used to, but like we do an IDP stuff where we talk about defense, and like I got him a t-shirt last Christmas that says waiver wire wizard. And the reason that I said one of my biggest strengths is the waiver wire is because of him. because the way he approaches things, I think, is so smart, and he's so good. And he's like me, that he's like, my dad's the nicest guy ever, but he's very competitive, and like he'll always smile, like haha, like whatever. He doesn't get in your face. He just likes to compete the same way I do. So like part of my inspiration to make a good podcast and stuff is like I feel like I'm still always trying to beat him or find a way to beat him, because I've never been able to, because he's always been so good. So it's a fun way to try to compete with him and stuff like that, because we still compete in our own little fantasy stuff. But it's a good way, like I said, to be connected. And he's so good at it, and it makes me more competitive, and it makes me work even harder to try to beat him in something, because even to this day I feel like I still can't.
That's super rad. Do your friends, do they hit you up on, game day and ask you to give them fantasy advice? Yo, who should I start out of this group of people?
Yeah, it's happened more and more. I think like last season I was just starting out, so a lot of people didn't know. But I think the more people they see it in my posts on my own personal social medias and stuff like that, I get a lot more questions now from people that they see me posting stuff or they listen to my podcast. So like anyone that's friends or that I know, I'm always happy to help out. And whenever someone asks, I'm like, always reach out if you have any more questions, because I want to just help people win their leagues the same way that I want to win. So if I can be of some small help, I'd love to. But that's one of the other special things that you talk about beyond people even listening. Just the fact that other people value my opinion on something like fantasy football is really special to me, and that's something that means a lot, that anyone would value my opinion enough to ask like what I think of starting Mike Davis or Tyler Lockett at their flex position on a Sunday morning. I think that stuff's really cool, and it's been really special that people that I know are willing to reach out to me. Just like me, I'm just a regular guy, to ask for fantasy football advice. So I think that thing is really, really cool.
It is really, really cool. And what else is really, really cool is the fact that you said that you did your home league and you guys did an in-person draft, and it was like your first experience with something like that. How cool was that experience?
It was really, really cool, especially because it's one of those things that, again, like everyone goes to different schools now and does different things. So that was like the only time that we're ever all together in person and stuff like that. And that was really special because this is the 6th year we've done the league. Yeah, this is year 6. And to get to do that in person, we had 9 out of 12 guys there in person, and we were all just sitting around like with our computers and stuff like that. And it was really cool before to get to talk, but like even after, people hung out for like 4 or 5 hours. That's why I love fantasy, because again, I keep saying it, but it brings people together. And like it gets us in the room. We start on football, but then football branches out to so many more things. So to get to spend that time together, and like I said, fantasy football is an excuse to talk and an excuse to get each other. And if you're awkward in conversation, fantasy football is like that anchor, so to speak, that you can always go back to because you play it. But it helps build so many other relationships because it gives you something to talk about. It gives you a reason to be in the same room, and then it helps you make friends and do all that. So that's what I absolutely love about fantasy football.
Exactly. I mean, my home draft is coming up this weekend, and I'm like so pumped because it's in person and most of the people are going to be here. We have a few that have to do it video chat, but it's going to be exciting. So I'm very excited that you got to experience that as well. When you were at the Fantasy Football Expo, did you get to see any of the drafts that were going on or participate in any kind of draft?
I actually didn't, unfortunately. I know the Kings Classic was going on at the Hall of Fame, and I was with the guy I met from my league and my other roommate. My other roommate could give less of a crap about fantasy football. He likes football, but he just doesn't play fantasy. He doesn't have any interest in it at all. So for us, we were more like, we walked through the Hall of Fame, and I didn't get to do any draft stuff at night either because we went to Cleveland to see his sister. It's in Canton. Cleveland's an hour away, and his sister lived in Cleveland, so we got to visit with her. That was amazing. So I didn't get to participate in any drafts, but I got to see the Hall of Fame. We got to go to Cleveland to meet his sister, who I'd never met, and we had a blast. And then the actual Sunday of the expo and stuff, there was a lot of connecting with people. But I didn't get to participate in any draft stuff. But I hope if I go back again, that I'd be lucky enough to get to participate in something like that. Would be really cool.
So I want to take it back real quick. I want to talk more about like your favorite kind of fantasy football setups and stuff. But before I do that, I have another podcast question for you, which is, or not even a podcast question, just a question in general. You've brought up a lot about how you're in college. How is balancing being in school and doing fantasy football content and managing your leagues and everything else? How do you balance all of that?
It's difficult, and I wouldn't lie if I said it's not difficult, because again, I have 2 other jobs and stuff like that I work. Not like I work crazy hours at both, but I have 2 other jobs I work at, and that's not even the 3rd job that is fantasy football and stuff like that on top of school. So it is difficult to balance, to find time for everything. But the way I also see it is yes, I create content. Yes, it's annoying sometimes to record a podcast, but let's pretend I didn't have a podcast. I would still be spending hours every day looking at my fantasy teams, doing research and stuff like that. So the balance is just I'm just living my normal life. I just happen to create content and stuff like that. I'd still be doing fantasy football even if I never had a podcast, Twitter, TikTok, and stuff like that. So it is a little bit more time, but that I have to spend on it. But I found better ways to balance and stuff like that to make time for my life, my jobs, and stuff like that for friends. So like once I'm in the habit of like I'm in my school routine, I know how much time I have. I've gotten better at time managing, but there's definitely some late nights and stuff. But like the thing I said more than anything is I enjoy it. It doesn't really matter to me because I enjoy every part of it. So it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like this is my free time. So I'm going to do fantasy football in my free time just like I normally would. So the balance part of it is tough because it takes a lot of time, but it's also like this is what I'd be doing anyway. So for the most part, like the timing stuff works out. There are nights like everybody where you're like, screw this, I don't want to do this, and you have to just do it. But for the most part, I'd say 95% of the time, I'm just doing it because I love it, I enjoy it, and that's what I'd be doing with my free time anyway. So I always will find time for free time because everyone needs their free time, and I just happen to do fantasy football for the free time.
And what is something that you wish you would have known prior to starting fantasy football, like podcasting and putting your work out there? What's something that you wish you would have known sooner that took you a little bit longer to learn than you would have preferred?
I think the biggest thing is like I was too afraid to just be myself, I think, at first. And I don't think I was ever like a super different personality. But what I realized is the more I was authentic and I didn't care, I made the jokes in my head that I thought were funny, whether people cared or not. I said whatever was on my mind if I wanted to talk about this or that. And then I just enjoyed that. And I wish I just knew that more. And then the other thing that I wish, like going right along with that I wish I knew more and like getting to do it, being authentic, is it's all about trial and error. That's one thing I wish I told myself because at the beginning I was so hard on myself, like this isn't good, this isn't good. But like once I realized it's okay to fail, and every time I screw up, I can find a way to fix it, or anytime I succeed, I can find a way to replicate that. That's the biggest thing. It's all about trial and error. And if you do fantasy football, and if you listen to my first podcast, you're going to listen to them and think that I'm absolutely awful. Am I good now? No, but they're not absolutely awful like they were at the beginning. That's the biggest thing. It's all about trial and error. It's always about constant ways trying to improve, but enjoying failing. Because every time you fail, it's an opportunity to make the next one that much better. That's what I say to people is enjoy when you succeed and enjoy when you fail. Because either way, you are going to learn from it, and you can learn from every single experience in this space. But the other thing that I would also give, if I can say this, and this is I mentioned that if anyone wants to start a podcast about fantasy football or anything, my biggest advice on earth to absolutely anyone, and I mentioned this and I said I want to talk about this, is ask someone who knows more than you do. I've done 39 episodes this season, and this doesn't make me anything at all. I'm not saying that I do anything right, but the one thing that I can do that other people aren't doing is all 38 guests I've had on, or 39 guests I've had on now, every single time right after the show, I say, what can I do better? Because the people I'm having on are people that are bigger than me. They're people that know more than me. Even if they don't know more than me, they might just have a different perspective, just like fantasy football. Because I know what I know, but if someone else can give me a new piece of information, that's a way for me to learn. And I ask every single person who listens to my podcast, my friends and family, my dad, whoever I can, what can I do better? Because there's someone that it's harder for me to see. It's easier for someone on the outside to know. That's the biggest thing, whether it's football or it's basketball or whatever you're talking about on your podcast. Ask someone you look up to or ask someone that knows. Because if you're not asking how you can do better, you're not learning. And that's been the biggest thing for me across everything else I've ever learned is just ask people what you can do better. You have to be willing to take criticism and improve. And I think that's why I've had some success, because again, I always say to my guests, be as harsh as you please can be. I want to know what I can do better. And I think my podcast is so much better than it is now than it was 3 months ago, because I've asked 30 or 40 people now that are really good at this, what can I do better? And I try to take something from every single person. You know, that's the biggest thing I would say to people is you have to be willing to adapt, and you have to ask questions of how you can do better, because there's people that know more than you. And if you think you're the smartest guy in the room, you're probably doing it wrong, because no matter how big you are, how big you get, that's one thing people always tell me is you can ask someone who learned has a different perspective. Just like the Fresh Fantasy podcast, you can always find a way to get better. And the best way you can do that is asking people for advice. So that's what I would say. That's the biggest thing I can tell anyone about any type of content creating.
And I'll agree with that. I really do enjoy being able to like go to people that I respect in this industry and be like, hey, you know that I can improve here, here, and here, but what else? Like, because I'm not seeing everything, like you said. Having that fresh set of eyes and in ears is very important. So that's a really great advice. Is there anything that maybe is like a little obscure that people wouldn't think is something that you learned from podcasting that you've actually learned through this process?
Like learning podcasting in general, or like
Just
towards real life?
just anything. It may be something that you've taken from podcasting into your real life, or something that somebody's told you that kind of like hit home, and you're like, oh, duh.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned in podcasting stuff is it's weird of how much it helps my social interactions in general. Because if you'd meet me, you probably wouldn't think I'm like that shy guy. I come across like I'm outgoing, but in real life, I'm so shy. I'm afraid of everybody. I'm so afraid to talk to everybody. But helping me do podcasts and interacting with people like you, Casey, we met once and we talked for 3 minutes, but we came on before the show, and it's just like we've been friends
Yeah.
forever. And I feel like my interactions with people in real life have changed so much because I'm so much more comfortable talking to people I don't know. And the other thing, like you're having me on and I'm just talking about me. People love talking about themselves. And that's one thing that I've realized that's helping make friends, connections, social interactions. Ask about people, because that'll lead into so many different things. Just ask them questions, because people love to talk about themselves. That's not a bad thing. Like I like to talk about me. Casey, you like to talk about
I like to talk
you.
about me.
Exactly. Everybody does. That's the biggest thing. It's helped my social interactions so much. Not that I struggled so much before, but like now I never ever run out of conversations because I'm so used to asking questions and stuff like that on podcasts, and I love hearing about people's lives and stuff like that. So it's definitely helped the social things. But one of the obscure things that I think that like I wish I knew at the beginning, and stuff like that is like it's so weird, but like it's like don't be afraid to be different. I know that goes with the authentic thing, but like just because someone hasn't done something before, that's a reason why you should do it. I know that sounds weird, but like if no one's ever done it, think of it, try it. Because people are always wanting to listen to something new or something unique. And it's the same thing with TikTok. We talked about there's always going to be a new app that comes out that takes over control. So if no one's ever done it, do it. That's the biggest thing I've learned is don't be afraid to be different, because people like different. They like something they've never seen. You know, people like it's like a magic trick. People like to be wowed. People like to find something different that they haven't seen before. That's the biggest thing. And I find some weird stuff like that, some weird jokes I tell or stuff like that other people don't do. I try to just bring new ways. And if I think of something no one's done or tried, I try to do that if I haven't seen much of it, because people really seem to enjoy, and it's the weirdest thing, people seem to enjoy things they've never seen before, because people like different and they like new ways to be excited and new ways to be tricked. So that's the biggest thing is if you think of something and you haven't seen it, try it. And we talked about trial and error. It's okay if you fail. It might not work, but it might really help because no one's ever done it. And if you can take advantage of it, it leads into so many other things.
And that's been something that a lot of people who've come on the show have brought up. Like when you hear Matt Harmon's name, for instance, there you go. You think perception, right? That was something that nobody had done before, and he put his mark on it. And that goes along with what you just said. So yeah, definitely don't be afraid to try something new, especially if get outside your comfort zone. Sometimes getting outside your comfort zone isn't a bad thing. I started this podcast because my anxiety is through the roof. And I was like, if I do a podcast where I have to actually have a conversation with somebody for more than a minute, get out of that, break out of that. And I don't think it's like super helped, but I think it's helped me enough that once the conversation gets going, I'm comfortable. It just takes that initial minute or two to get your nerves out. And then it's like talking to a friend. Exactly.
It really is. That's the other, I love what you just said. And that's something I'd love to emphasize is like, that's one thing I found is like, and people think that just because I do podcasting, automatically assume that every time I meet a new person, I'm completely comfortable. It's the same thing every time. I'm nervous for the first minute or two, but that's also helped me in real life. One of the things that you said, I wish I knew that even in real life interactions or podcasts, the most awkward part is the first 2 minutes. So if you can just ask questions about their life or just get people to talk about them, then it's fine. That takes out the awkwardness. And you feel more comfortable when you get to know someone and stuff like that. So those first 2 minutes are the worst. And then after that, it just leads into so many other things. Because like Casey, we met for 2 minutes and you seemed so outgoing and we talked for 2 minutes. That's all we needed. We got for 2 minutes. And then I walk in here on the StreamYard and like, we're friends. I think you're awesome. Like I absolutely adore you already. And like, again, it just took those first 2 or 3 minutes to get to where we are now. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would tell people is socially, podcasts, whatever, you just got to get past those first 2 or 3 minutes. The same way with content creating, you have to get past those first 2 or 3 episodes, TikToks, tweets. Once you do it just a little bit, it makes everything else so much easier.
It really does. And I look back at like when I first started podcasting and how long it took for everything. It felt like it took so long. And then once you start, I don't have to do this and I can do that and I can get this out when, I can make a schedule and do all that jazz. And so you do. And I think that's great advice, Alex, that you're giving people, is that it takes time. It does. But you're sitting here saying, I'm not the greatest podcaster in the world. Okay, maybe you're not the greatest, but you're really good at what you do. And I really appreciate you bringing the preparation into the whole fold, because not enough people, I think, look at it like you really do need to be prepared. That's why I don't do a fantasy football podcast, because I know it's time sensitive and I know I have to do this and prepare this, and honey, please, not, so more power to you being able to do all of that stuff.
I appreciate that. No, that means a lot, but you're so right. And again, you don't have to be the greatest podcaster in the world or anything like that. Like, you just have to be more prepared than anyone else. I know you hear the cliche that, when coach calls your number, you got to be ready to play. But it is true that in fantasy football or anything, that's the biggest thing, like willing to be different, but also just be willing to put yourself out there. But like, when you're going to put yourself out there, be prepared. That's the biggest thing, especially in content creating, that if you're more prepared than the other guy, that gives me an advantage, because I might not be good at podcasting or editing pictures, especially for Instagram, but I'm going to back on my preparation and how much time I take, because that also is another thing you talked about, the anxiety and the nerves. I don't get as nervous on podcasts anymore, because I know that every time I have a new guest, I'm trying my absolute best to be as prepared as I possibly can be. So when the lights go on, I'm already ready. I already did all the work. I just gotta talk about my work, and that's the biggest thing. But again, I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but I don't think I can emphasize that enough for new people and stuff like that, because it's so, so important to hear. And I wish more people told me that when I first started.
100%. The reason I started this podcast in the first place is because you don't know what to do when you first start. And and everybody's experience is similar, but also different. And it's really cool to be able to take tidbits from each one of you. Like, I learned stuff today just from you about like the three different, and keeping people engaged. They like the first piece of news in your for new, so that's really, really dope advice. And it would be cool to hear the stuff that you're saying more often. You get better. You'll get better. Everybody will get better. So let's talk about like fantasy football, like setup and things of that nature. What is your favorite type of league to play in, settings wise, anything? Just tell me what you like.
Yeah, so I think the easy answer is something like anything that has to do with redraft. That's my biggest thing. I'm actually playing in my first dynasty league this year.
Okay. Whoa, yeah.
Stuff like that. So I've never tried it before. I'm still getting used to it. So I wouldn't say I dislike, but I feel bad more for people when they ask me dynasty questions, because I just don't know. Redraft is the stuff I spend the most time on. That's where there's the most information. And like, again, I know for some people that they're like, I like stuff with less information, but like, I like as much information as possible, because I'm willing to take the time and find as much as I possibly can and trust that I can process it better than other people. So the more information I can find, the better. And I think that's why redraft has been good for me, because there's so much information out there. And like, I've gotten better at, processing it and finding that stuff. So I like redraft, but I would say my favorite format, even though I only play it in one league, has to be IDP, which is for defensive players, for people, because like, I love IDP because it's like fantasy football on steroids, in the sense that like in standard fantasy football, you probably play with 9 or 10 players that are in your starting lineup every week. But in defensive fantasy football, you have 15 or 16 players that start every week. So that's way more guys you get to watch and pay attention to and stuff like that. So for me, like, the more, the better that I can pay attention to. So that's why I love IDP, but definitely the redraft stuff. And I respect other crazy formats that have all these settings and stuff like that. But I know my bread and butter is the stuff that I take the most time with, which is redraft and IDP. And I also like those because, like I said, I'm competitive and I play to win. I mean, I'm always willing to try a new league and stuff like that, and I'll get competitive and I'll find ways to get good at it. But I do like the stuff that I'm just naturally better at, because that's where I excel and I like to win. And like I told you, when I come in, I'm ready to friggin' compete and win. And like, it's the same thing that whether it's in fantasy football, my mentality is like lock me in a room and see who's going to come out, me or you, and I'm willing to back my preparation and all the training, so to speak, with my Rocky music, getting my podcast notes. I'm willing to train and say that, like, if we, again, lock me in a room and like I'm that competitive, that I'm going to make sure that I come out. And the fantasy football community is not like that. No one's cutthroat or stuff like that. But it's more for me, I say that, to lock me in a room, when it's like, when you have your chance to get prepared, I'm going to be more prepared with you. So if you lock me in a room and it's me or you, I'm already going to be more prepared, and that gives me an advantage. And that's more what I'm trying to say to people. I'm not saying to be cutthroat and to cut people off. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in terms of if you want to make a name for yourself or you want to be good at anything, whether it's fantasy or whatever, you have to be prepared and you have to be willing to put yourself in that scenario that, if you get locked in a room with someone else and there's only one person that can come out, how confident are you that you're going to come out? How prepared are you? How ready are you for the moment? And that's the biggest thing I'd say to people, because if you don't feel like you're going to walk into that room and make it out, then you're probably not doing something right. You're not going to be as good as you want to be because you're not ready. That's definitely the biggest thing.
Since you like IDP so much, do you put out IDP content?
I don't.
Okay, I was just wondering.
No, I don't, because there's not a huge audience for it, I think, yet. And like, for me, I'm just trying to build the biggest audience I can because I'm newer. So me, like trying to do IDP, it just doesn't give me a big enough chance to get many people. I love IDP. I absolutely love IDP. But the biggest chance that I can get Alex Caruso name out there and get people to follow me is doing stuff that people spend the most time on, which is redraft. And that's why I'm focusing on that, because that's the biggest way for me to expand my audience quickly. It's the same thing with getting guests, the free marketing. What are most people going to see? Redraft. Okay, well, I'm going to do redraft because that gives me the best chance to make it. So if I, get more followers and stuff like that, I might do IDP stuff because I have to get it. But right now, I'm still at the ground and I'm trying to build up. And the best way I can do it is find my way to expose myself to as many people as humanly possible right now. And that's kind of what I'm focused on.
And I like that. I mean, you are young and you have plenty of time to branch out and do all of that stuff. So it's really cool. And it's going to be awesome to see where you go from here, because you can only go up. You're doing such an awesome job with everything that you got. You're just skyrocketing. I'm so happy that I came across that tweet. I'd never really interacted with you. And for that magically to come across my feed, I don't know so I miss so many tweets, and to see that one and be like, I've been looking for this kid my whole life. Like, I need a TikTok guy. But you're more than just a TikTok guy. You've got a lot going on. So before we go, can you go ahead and just let everybody know where they can find all your stuff and what you got going on?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show, and thank you for the kind words. That means a lot. And like I said, anytime anyone says that means the world to me. So for one, I appreciate that. But you can find me on Twitter at Alex Caruso, just like the basketball player. Just look it up at Alex Caruso on Twitter. That is the best way to find me. But the other best way that you can find me is my podcast on all podcast platforms, anything you can think of, at the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. I'll pop up with a little green logo and a football. But if you like TikTok, you don't want to listen to me for an hour. You're like, Alex, I don't like you that much, so I'd rather just you give me my 3 points and get out of there. Follow me on TikTok at fresh_fantasy. Those are the best ways to find me. So whatever performer you can choose, you can pick your poison if you're willing to, and that's the best ways to find me. But thank you so much again.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. And yes, just like the basketball player, I did Google you earlier to try to find some information out, and I'm like, yeah, he's not the basketball player guy. So everybody should check out Alex's stuff, all of his stuff. Go follow him on all platforms. Just do it, because you're missing out if you're not. But Alex, again, so great to have been able to meet you in person, and so great to be able to have this conversation with you tonight as well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And everybody, come back next week. We're going to have another awesome new episode. Stay rad. Hey.